Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Avery, can you still hear me?
Yep, we're good to go.
Excellent. So welcome, everyone. Welcome to part 2 of our economic webinar today. For those of you who joined us on the national portion earlier, and we're now going to move into the more Virginia-specific economic updates. And thank you to everyone from the Richmond market for bearing with us with the 2 separate webinars. We wanted to share Chris with our clients across the nation, but also wanted to make sure you still receive the Virginia-specific data that you love every year. And so 2 parts was the answer on that. And by the way, just a side note, we do miss seeing all of you face-to-face. We're, of course, saddened that we can't see all your smiling faces and have the fun of the big reunions we always have at this event every year. A couple of quick logistics. For those of you for CPE attendance tracking, on this platform, we will need you to answer the polling questions in the chat function for us to be able to track attendance. We'd love it if you can answer both on the screen and in the chat, because that will give us the automatic totals with each response. But we will be polling from the chat function to verify attendance for CPE. We did submit for SHRM credit, and we believe that they're going to tack that onto the national webinar. And if you have questions about SHRM credit, just follow up with one of our representatives after the event, and we'll keep you posted as that comes through. And lastly, just a quick announcement. The screen that you see here that you've all been looking at as you've been logging in is a visual of our most recent consolidation right before COVID. Wanted to make sure that all of you who have followed us over the last couple of decades are aware of our last reorg. If you blinked, you might have missed it because it literally happened right before COVID. But we just keep growing and keep making that effort to bring all of our specialized recruitment resources together under one umbrella as one professional recruitment powerhouse. And we continue to do this to hopefully make things even more seamless for you, our clients, and more streamlined for all of our clients across the nation. We have just about every professional function you can think of under our umbrella now: finance, accounting, legal, human resources, supply chain, administrative. I think you see them all listed there. If you have a recruitment or consulting need, you can ask one of our team members, and they'll get you to the right experts on our overall umbrella of experts. So never hesitate to ask. With that, I am excited to have Chris continue with her economic updates for today. And so thankful to have you back. I know everybody enjoys seeing you every year, and a big shout out to Avery for all of her help helping us get this organized today. Chris, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Jen. Just a couple of more administrative things. Please feel free to ask questions throughout. If we do have time at the end, and you can put it in the box on the right-hand side, we'll try to answer those. And then Jen will send you a copy of this PowerPoint, or Avery will, to everyone who's attended sometime this afternoon. So with that, I'm going to give you an overview just real quick, because many of you were at the previous, there might have been a few that were not at the previous presentation. But in terms of the national economy, the recession started in February. We expect the rebound, and you'll see some charts on this, to start in the 3rd quarter. And pre-COVID employment levels, when we get back to that, it's going to vary by industry and it's going to vary by region. And I'll show you some variation by industry. The regional issues, again, are going to vary depending on the spread of COVID-19. Are we going back into a lockdown? And also the type of industries that we see in a particular region. And we'll look at the 3 largest MSAs in Virginia in more detail. Employment right now in Virginia growing at about the national pace, a little bit faster right now. Over the long run, would expect it to grow at about the national pace. And we'll look at that toward the end of this presentation. So very quickly, again, just a recap of the nation. The economy was fundamentally strong before going into this recession. Here you see employment the huge drop off. We lost all the jobs that were created over the prior expansion. On the right-hand side, consumer spending on goods and services plummeted and has been coming back. That's important because they make up 60 to 70% of GDP. We saw income jump because of the CARES Act and the increase in unemployment insurance, as well as the money going to households. It's come back down, but still we're seeing income percent change from a year ago at pretty good levels. And industrial production, so manufacturing activity, output of utilities and mining dropped quickly as the recession started, and now we're seeing a rebound. The latest month, though, dropped off a bit. So overall, again, this economy was doing well before we went into the recession. When we look at GDP, you see the two negative numbers in the first and second quarter. And then the third quarter, we're looking for something around a 20% annualized increase. The number will be coming out tomorrow morning at 8:30. And some groups, the Atlanta Fed, looking for something as high as 30% growth, which would be up here. And that's basically because of a rebound where people are starting to go back to work and spend. When we look out the next 4 or 5 quarters, you see we've got growth around 5%, and most economists have that as well. And that's, again, because of the rebound of people coming back to work. Anything above 2.5% is considered very strong. Now, some economists have started to revise down their forecast for the fourth quarter of this year because we did not see that third stimulus plan that the president and the Congress has been trying to pass. I would expect that once we get either Trump reelected or a new administration, that we will see some stimulus passed, even if it's during a lame duck session. So bottom line, all economists agree that we're going to have a sharp and short, but not sustained rebound in terms of GDP. Now, when it comes to employment, that's going to vary greatly depending on a vaccine. And we talked about this in the other session. So remember, we're already, we've got 10 vaccines that are in trials. The government is paying for some of the firms to be manufacturing that right now. Once it is available, the CDC is planning to make distribution of it. And so we are seeing the government working very quickly with the industry to help get the vaccine out as quickly as possible. So with that, knowing that we need to feel safe before we get out, I have sort of a test question to see how safe you all feel that are participating here. So the question is, how many days have you stayed in a hotel over the past 3 months? And I believe
the poll is up, and I see people are answering. If you could also answer in the chat, that'll help us verify your attendance. And the results are coming in. All right, it looks like it's staying steady. So I'm going to end it. So how many days have you stayed in a hotel over the past 3 months? 62% of our respondents say none.
Wow.
30%, 32%, only 1 to 5 days. And then no one has stayed for more than 10 days.
Okay. Well, here's a follow-up question. If you stayed in a hotel, was it mostly for business or vacation? So, you know, if you stayed 5 days and 3 of them were vacation, then say mostly vacation. So again, if you stayed in a hotel, just those that answered, was it mostly for business or vacation?
All right, also publishing this poll. And for everyone, if you're having trouble either seeing the full slide or if you're having audio issues, just click reconnect up at the top of your screen. That almost always works. And I see that people are answering the poll and are also typing their answer in the chat. And finally, if for some reason reconnect isn't working, we are going to send a recording of this presentation, so do not despair. But if you stayed in a hotel, Chris, 88% said it was for vacation.
Huh.
Yeah.
No surprise.
Yeah. But again, 62% hadn't gone to a hotel at all.
Yes. Good. Well, that says to me that we're not really feeling comfortable yet. the majority of the population. But I'm glad to see that some people have felt safe enough to venture out and hopefully have been wearing masks and using a lot of sanitation for their hands while they're out. Okay. So when we look at our forecasts, and if you were on the previous presentation, you saw this, we have 3 different forecasts for a vaccine. So we index it to pre-COVID employment, and these first numbers through the 3rd quarter of 2020 are actual data. Here we see that going from 100 to 90, what that means is we've lost 10% of all employment in the US. So this is on average for all jobs. When we look at the fast scenario, that would suggest we get a vaccine in the 1st quarter of 2021 that's widely distributed. If we were to have that, we would get to pre-COVID employment by the 2nd quarter of 2021. The moderate scenario would be a vaccine in the 2nd quarter of 2021, widely distributed, would get to pre-COVID levels 2 to 3 quarters later. And our worst case scenario now is a vaccine not until the 4th quarter of 2022, which means that we wouldn't get to pre-COVID levels until 2023. So this varies greatly by industry. This is a messy chart, but I'll peel back this little by little and you'll see how different industries are going to do. So again, we've indexed the employment numbers to pre-COVID 2019 quarter 4, and we did this analysis at a detailed level. So we economists use NAICS code, so North American Industry Classifications. So for retail, for example, that's at the 2-digit level, a high level. But when we did our analysis, we looked at more detailed levels. So grocery stores will come back at a different rate than restaurants or pharmaceuticals. And so pharmacies or drugstores. So once we looked at all the detailed information, we summed it up to take it to the retail level. And this is for the US overall. So first, the biggest decline, no surprise, is in accommodation and food services. So you see a large drop off in terms of employment. And then the other one close behind it, arts and entertainment and recreation, because of course you have to have social distancing and you can't always do it in those locations. But you see for accommodation and food services, it coming back. And then it takes quite a while though. And during our forecast period, it does not get back to pre-COVID levels. It takes longer than that. As this recession goes on, the longer it goes on, the more firms and retail establishments we see going out of business, which then will impact the fact that we may never see pre-COVID levels of employment for many years to come. Arts and entertainment, you can see it's slower to come back because it's harder to social distance there, but then we do start to see that it does get to the pre-COVID level. On this next slide now, I took out the 2 largest declining sectors, and now we're looking at, in red here, mining and quarrying. You see the decline there, but then you see a quick rebound in activity or employment. Social other services, which would be things like salons, photographers, barbershops, you see coming back and then taking a while to get back to the previous levels and being just above pre-COVID levels as we go forward to 2023. Another one in blue, administrative and support remediation services, and this is basically support for offices and manufacturing facilities, and so it would be landscaping, janitors, that type of thing. So you see that dropping off quickly and then coming back. On this next slide now, I've peeled away some of the larger ones, and retail shows up as down about 13%, a loss of employment. But notice as we come back, we flatline at a 3% loss over the previous, over pre-COVID highs. And the reason for that are twofold. One, we see more companies that are going out of business that are retail establishments not coming back. And then the general trend in employment for retail has been slightly negative. And that's because in part of more retail business going online, which would be in a different sector. It would be in wholesale trade, or it would be in transportation and distribution that we're seeing those employment numbers showing up. So again, retail not getting back to the pre-COVID levels just because of long-run changes in the economy. In yellow, transportation of warehousing, you're seeing that number coming back more quickly. And in green, agriculture comes back very quickly. If you remember, the previous recession that we went in the middle part of the country never even saw a recession because it was mostly farm areas, and clearly we all need food even if we're in a recession. And then finally on this slide, I'm showing you the information industry, which would be media. It would include motion pictures. It would include online tools where you're gathering data, the green, educational services. And notice that after we get to the pre-COVID levels, we start to see a little bit of an increase. Yellow is professional business services. And again, once we get to pre-COVID or once we get to COVID levels, it continues to grow. And here it didn't dip as much because individuals could work from home. And then in purple, we're looking at healthcare. So healthcare, again, going once we get to pre-COVID employment levels, it continues to grow at a pretty good clip because of the demographics that we're seeing here in the U.S. And in gray here, construction also has at first been hit very hard, but after the first month or two, we've seen some really good growth, especially on the residential side with construction. Now, with offices and buildings, would expect that to be slower, maybe going out a year or two because of remote working. So actually, let me flipped ahead to by accident. Having asked that or talked about that remote work, sorry, let me ask you one more question. What percentage of workers in your company are currently working remotely today?
All right, so please answer on the poll and also in the chat. And I'm going to leave this poll up for a little longer because I know some people said they didn't have time to answer. Okay, it looks like everyone has answered, at least on the pop-up poll. So we've got what percentage of your workers in your company are currently working remotely today? We've got 45% of people saying 75 to 100% of their colleagues are working remotely today. 19%, 50 to 75, also 19%, 0 to 25. So almost everyone is back. But yeah, the plurality definitely is 75 to 100% remote work today.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so following up on that, what percentage of your colleagues do you expect to work remotely after a vaccine has been widely distributed in the United States?
All right. So you can answer this poll here and also in the chat. After the vaccine, what percent will be working remotely? This is a question I have for you, Chris.
It's a question for me. Well, let's see what the audience says first.
All right. I'll leave it up for a few more seconds. All right. It looks like everyone has answered. And so we've got, so after a vaccine has been widely distributed, 40% of respondents say only either none to 25% of their people will be working remotely. Only 6% say everyone is going to continue to work remotely after a vaccine. So that is also interesting.
Yeah, and that's consistent with what I've seen elsewhere, that it's, we've heard of, several large companies say that we're going to work remotely forever, which kind of caused some people to jump to the conclusion that it would be that way for just about everyone. But 6% saying everyone would work remotely is consistent with a lot of other surveys and things that I've seen. So yes, thank you. Thanks for providing that information. Okay, so one of the things that we've been tracking is job postings. So we have a software called JobsEQ, and within it we spider thousands of websites every day and update it every day. We deduplicate it, and as we've gone into this COVID environment, we've tried to consider ways that we can have a sense of how deep are we in this and when are we coming out. Information that's daily to give us an advance warning of what we're going to see in the employment numbers that come out only monthly. So here we actually have a blog. If you clicked on this link below, you can go to the blog. And what we did is we looked at our history. We've got about 4 years of job postings, and we took that history and we forecasted it to what would job postings be today if we didn't have COVID. And it was fairly easy to forecast because seasonality basically drives job postings, and especially big holidays drive it. So then, so here's where we expect job postings to be over the next year or so. And then here's where they were given COVID. So you can see the huge drop off in the US that we saw in job postings. And again, that ties very closely to what we saw in employment numbers in the US. And then here we start to see some very good improvement. And as you recall in the employment chart earlier, we were seeing improvement in employment. And now it's kind of flattened out. And that is what basically we've seen. Employment is continuing to improve, but it's not improving as quickly as it had been before. So we did this by state, and those states where we see employment closer to the expected is where we're seeing those states where we're seeing job posting closer to what is expected, we're seeing employment doing better in those states. And so again, if you clicked on that blog, you can go in and look at all the different states. Omaha, as of the last data we have available, was 1% above the expected. The observed job postings is 1% above, so meaning that employment in that state doing a bit better. But if you were, and then looking at Virginia, we're 34% below. So if you were to click on Virginia in the blog, you would see the historical job postings. And here you can see that we dropped off quickly. We came back, and then as people got tired of, and as some of the restrictions were lifted, that kind of flatlined a bit. And now we're still about 34% below. Interesting that if you went to this blog and clicked on Hawaii, it had one of the biggest drops from a year ago, and it remains down over that time. And this morning, the unemployment rate numbers by MSA came out, and their unemployment rate jumped at the fastest pace of any other metropolitan area in the nation. So clearly we're starting to see some improvement now. Going down to the employment data that we get from the state. These come out monthly, and these employment numbers, broadest indicator of economic activity, but remember that these numbers are based on a survey of about 30% of all firms, and once a year in March, they benchmark this to what's called the quarterly census of employment and wage data, and that's pretty much almost 100% of the sample. I bring this out because I'm going to show you some of those quarterly data later, which have a lag to it, but they won't get revised. So here in Virginia, notice during the past recession, the orange line, typically we do better than the U.S. The gray shaded area is the U.S. overall employment percent change from a year ago. And something I've pointed out to you just about every year is that this in Virginia, when we were seeing all the defense cuts, we almost went into a recession when the rest of the country was growing. So that's one of the things I'm sure that many people will be thinking about, especially Northern Virginia and Hampton Roads, as we go through this election in a week or so, is if we do see a change to a Democratic administration, that will certainly impact our economy in terms of defense spending will not be as strong as we've seen over the past couple of years. into the pandemic, the employment drop has not been as great as that in the U.S., but certainly we've seen a considerable decline. Now, here are the major employment sectors that we look at. So here's the total. We're down again 5.3% in Virginia compared to 6.7% in the U.S. And looking at the major sectors, I'm going to show this to you for the 3 largest metro areas. And in each of them, you're going to see leisure and hospitality. Tourism is seeing the biggest decline in employment, down 20% from a year ago in terms of employment. And August is the latest data that we have. One sector where we've seen an increase is construction in Virginia, compared to a decline of 5% in the U.S. Another sector to point out, our information sector, not declining as much as the U.S. And PBS, professional business services, not declining as much. And this sector pays very high wages in Northern Virginia, on average around $100,000. So that's an important sector. FIRE is finance, insurance, and real estate, and TWU, transportation, warehousing, and utilities. Now looking to Northern Virginia, and again, during the time where we saw the defense cuts, its employment went negative for several months on a year-over-year basis. But Northern Virginia is important. It's the big driver in the state, often creating 40% or more of the employment that we're seeing on a monthly basis. And here you can see it dropped off in relative to Virginia, that's shown in gray now, at about the same pace. And we're back up just about to where Virginia is in the year-over-year decline in employment. In terms of the major sectors, leisure off more than in the state. And of course, we've got a lot of tourism in the Northern Virginia area because of the capital. Professional business services, good to see that's only down about a 0.5 percentage point compared to almost 4% in the state. However, transportation warehousing down about 13% compared to a small drop in the U.S. Manufacturing activity is surprisingly up 2%, but manufacturing is a very, very small component of the Northern Virginia economy, and construction down there, government up just slightly. Hampton Roads, again, impacted by the defense cuts several years ago, and its employment decline relative to the virus has been a bit more than in the state overall. Not a surprise given that we have a lot of tourism activity going on in the Hampton Roads area, and now you can see it coming back to about where we are in the state. In terms of sectors, encouraging to see that leisure, although it's a very big sector, large percentage in the Hampton Roads area, is not down as much as in the state overall. Professional business services, though, it's down more than in the state. Manufacturing, which is important, down only 3% compared to about 7% in the state. And retail down 6%. That's a component of tourism, down a bit more than we're seeing in the state overall. And then Richmond, where most of you are probably from, you see that we were not affected at all during that defense cut time as the state was in Northern Virginia and Hampton Roads. And of course, that's because we don't have much defense activity or defense-driven industries in the region here. As we went into the recession, it followed Virginia very closely. Some of the changes in terms of employment, again, leisure down, similar to the state, but not down as much. But again, still significant to see leisure down 18% on a year-over-year basis. Wholesale down significantly compared to the state. Retail down about the same as in the state. Information industry down a bit more. So overall, as we looked at all these major sectors, the biggest loser has been the leisure, the tourism area. Retail also being hit hard. Under leisure, we would also see some restaurants and the like. Now, unemployment rates. So here again, I put these all on one page because they follow similar trends. With Virginia in the upper left-hand side, you see we did not decline as much, or we did not increase as much as the state, the nation overall, and the unemployment rate has come down a bit quicker, so that's encouraging. When we look at Northern Virginia, it tracks very closely to Virginia, and again, that's in part because Northern Virginia is a big driver of employment in the state overall. Hampton Roads tracks it fairly well, but it has not come down as much, in part probably because of tourism, and Richmond again tracking pretty well with the state overall. Here's a chart that Jen likes me to show. We looked at unemployment. Now these are people who are filing for unemployment claims. They go to the unemployment office, they're out of a job, they file to get unemployment insurance. And this is the one that I showed you last year. And I show accounting and auditors, financial analysts and advisors, and I throw carpenters in there just to see a point of comparison because home building is very cyclical. So again, the last recession, you see the big spike in all of these. And last year in August 2019, there were only 31 accountants who had applied for unemployment insurance, only 18 financial analysts, and 19 carpenters. So let's fast forward to this year and the pandemic, and you can see the big spike. So the orange accountants had the biggest increase, peaked at 237 people filing for unemployment insurance. In August, the latest data, they've come down, but they're still at a very high 137. You could see financial analysts, which are the light blue, peaked at 123, and they're now down to 87 in August. And carpenters peaked at 193, and they're now down to 130. But another interesting thing here to see is that carpenters are below the pre-recession peak of last time, whereas we're seeing accountants and auditors much above the pre-recession peak of last recession, and we're seeing financial analysts just a little bit below the peak from the last recession. So accountants and auditors again rising fairly quickly. I wonder if part of that was due to the timing of when the pandemic came, that is March, April, just after the tax season. And that might be why perhaps more people were laid off in the accounting and auditor area. But again, even though it has come down, it remains still above the prior peak of the last recession. Okay, so looking to the job postings again that are a leading indicator of employment growth. So here I pulled up data on Virginia, and I'm looking at all job postings over the last 9 months. Over the last 12 months, there were 1.1 million job postings in the state. This blue line shows you job postings this year, and this gray line shows how we compare to last year. And again, we're looking at this because we're trying to get a sense for, is the economy starting to come back to more normal levels? And so you see that March, April, we saw job postings plummeted because firms did not think they could hire anyone. In fact, they were laying people off. So it was much below what we were seeing a year ago during the same time. And then we start to see it pick back up, but now we're seeing them decline. It may be in part because, again, of the increase in viruses that we're seeing. The type of job openings, retail sales has been important, but also look at software developers, network systems, and computer support, information security, and management analysts. All these people can be working from home. Registered nurses, of course, probably because of the vaccine. And now what I did here is to look to the USA, and we're thinking about what soft skills are needed. So I put, in all of these job postings, how many of them are requiring critical thinking? And so it's interesting to note that critical thinking has recently increased in terms of employers asking for that in their job postings. You can see that has started really since about August. And some of those occupations, registered nurses, accountants, and auditors, they're asking for critical thinking. Tax preparers, again, as stated in the earlier presentation, maybe because of needing help and people to critically think about the payroll protection program and the CARES Act and how to help their clients or their businesses work through that. So with that, let me insert another question here. Are skills going to become more important than college degrees for your future hiring?
Awesome. And Chris, could you zoom in a little bit so that we can see the details of this slide? And you can answer the poll. Please both answer it in the chat and also when the poll pops up, and I'll leave the poll open. Chris, that's better. We can see
Okay.
better. Okay, still seeing responses coming in for skills versus college degrees. All right, and so we are seeing 35% of respondents have said yes, skills would be more important, but also 35% of respondents said no, college degrees will remain more important. 12% say we already value skills over degrees, and 16% not sure or they're not involved with hiring.
That's really interesting. So yeah, we have seen more emphasis on skills, and even if college degrees are going to remain important to you in the future, trying to track those skills and understand them and seeing individual progression within an industry or a business seems to be becoming more important. So thank you. Thanks for answering that poll. So it looks like I can't go forward if we're on a larger screen. So then, the BLS, Bureau of Labor Statistics, tracks about 820 occupations, and here are some of them. But there are other occupations and skills that are being created over time that are not in these data. But with the job postings, we can go ahead and put in a keyword to see how many job ads contain the word cyber. They need someone with cyber skills. So I did this for Virginia, and here you can see they have picked up recently, and they've been pretty close to where they were a year ago. We had some spikes a year ago in requests for cyber skills, and here you see they're all in computer-related occupations. When we go to the next slide, I'm drilling down on, okay, what firms are requiring those cyber workers? And you can see many of them are defense related, probably up in Northern Virginia, SAIC, Raytheon, BAE. And then there are others here in the Virginia area, Capital One, that is requiring it, or some that might be more consulting groups. And then the certificates that are being required by these jobs that are cyber related, no surprise, a lot of them require a secret clearance, probably working with the federal government or with defense firms. And then certified security manager, Cisco certified network, and you can see some of the other occupations or some of the other certifications that those occupations need. So now, again, going back to a broader level, and here we're looking at the data that come from what I was telling you about earlier, the QCEW, Quarterly Census of Employment and Wages. So these data only go back to the second quarter, as opposed to on the earlier chart, I had data back to August, but those were the numbers that would be revised early next year. And I've rank ordered these so that you can see the major sectors, industries in Virginia, rank ordered by the sectors that are hiring the most. To orient you, the average wages are shown. Here in Virginia, overall average wages are about $60,000. The location quotient just means that that industry is concentrated in the region more than in the nation as a whole. Professional scientific, 1.66. We have a concentration, meaning we have a competitive advantage, meaning that if you're an economic developer, it's easier to attract those firms that are professional scientific services because we've already got supplier relationships, we've got the workforce that's here. And then I'm showing you the employment change. Sorry, I cut off what the period was, but it's over the last 5 years. Here's a chart, spark chart, showing you what it looks like. And on every one of these, you can see that the last quarter, which has COVID numbers in it, sees a decline. Arts and entertainment, a very large decline. Unclassified is just the Virginia Employment Commission gets these data on a quarterly basis, and sometimes they haven't classified which industry it's in, so that might take a quarter or two. Here's the annual average change over 5 years, and then going all the way to the right, the annual average percent change expected because of net new growth. So down at the bottom, in Virginia, expected to grow 0.5% on average yearly over the next 10 years. In the U.S., that's exactly what the U.S. is expected to grow, 0.5%. But so because of the growth in hospitals and healthcare, we're expected to see 6,700 more jobs needed. But that doesn't give you the full picture. That's only because of the net growth in the healthcare industry. But we're going to need an additional 24,000 people because people in healthcare are transferring to other industries, and 23,000 because people are exiting, many of which are retiring. So total demand every year for the next 10 years on average is we're going to need 55,000 more people to go into the healthcare industry. So Virginia overall, professional, scientific, and technical is at the top. When we look at Northern Virginia, same type of information at the bottom, growing at a faster pace than Virginia and the U.S. overall. Professional, scientific, and technical is at the top. Again, average pay $123,000. And this is where we see a lot of the defense companies in the region. A high location quotient, a big percent change. The decrease is very little in terms of the last quarter. Accommodation and food services, though, a big decline. And then healthcare is second in the state. And again, manufacturing, very small at the bottom, only 28,000 jobs of the 1.5 million. And this is for just the Northern Virginia portion of the MSA, which stands for Metropolitan Statistical Area. And every 10 years, the federal government looks at all of the counties, the commuting patterns, and they define a group of counties as a metropolitan statistical area if they're so interrelated that it makes more sense to look at it as one unit rather than separate counties. And again, they change that every 10 years based on commuting patterns. Moving down to Hampton Roads, the second largest MSA in the state, growth expected to be flat on average over the next 10 years based on the current industry mix, demographics, and past growth. Healthcare is at the top for them, similar to the state overall. And then we have retail and accommodation and food. Again, these impacted by the pandemic, and you can see the employment numbers dropping off. Manufacturing is near the top, and that's because of the shipyard within the area. And you see some very good average pay, and then professional technical services in the top 10 at 75,000. And then for many of you in Richmond, growth rate similar to what we're seeing in the state overall. It's the third largest MSA in terms of employment and population. And at the top, we see healthcare, retail, and then education. Finance is within the top 10. And of course, Capital One and a lot of the regional banks that are here play a role in that. The Federal Reserve Bank would not be here, but under, I believe, under public administration. So we economists tend to talk about industries, but it's really occupations that are important. So from that perspective, the BLS looks at about, again, they have about 820 or so occupations. We're looking at this in the detailed level. So I just pulled up the 20 largest occupations in Virginia to show you the employment, the wages, the 5-year history, similar to the other chart, and then the total demand, the number retiring, and the growth rate overall. And then I've highlighted in blue healthcare related, and you could see this is total demand on average. The 1-year forecast for the next 10 years, though, expecting to need 4,400 nurses, personal care aides, a large number as well, and nursing assistants. I've highlighted in green IT related, and you can see that within the top 10. And then I've put in bold 2 that I thought you'd be interested in, given the audience here: bookkeeping and accounting, accounting and auditors, strong demand, a good growth rate on accountants and auditors, up 0.6, but clerks down 0.5, and that's because of automation. However, we're still on bookkeeping clerks, still needing to see about 2,700 a year on average to replace people who are retiring, and another 2,400 because people are leaving that particular occupation and going to another one. Northern Virginia, in green, we're seeing software developers up at the top, and then registered nurses are a little further down, personal care aides, and you can see how, you know, the occupations needed vary by industry. Accountants and auditors are much higher in terms of number 11, in terms of the number of people needed in the Northern Virginia region, and then the bookkeeping clerks below them, number 14. And here, the wages on average for the accountants, 93,000 and 50,000 for the clerks in Northern Virginia. Hampton Roads, we don't see anything in green in terms of the IT in the top 20, but you see the impact of the healthcare industry, where you see everywhere, in nurses, personal care aides, and assistants. And then we see bookkeeping and accounting, and the needs here, the bookkeeping and accounting clerks showing up, but not accountants overall, because within this region, we're seeing more of manufacturing oriented. So we see maintenance and repair workers within the top 20, first line supervisors actually of retail, sales people, again, because of the tourist intensity of that region. And then finally, Richmond, again, we're seeing nursing, the healthcare industry, nursing assistants. We are seeing some IT within the top 20, and then bookkeeping clerks are number 14, and accountants below that at number 18 in terms of the number of jobs. And again, a very good growth rate, 0.6% over the next few years, on average, actually over the next 10 years on average, on a yearly basis. And then I should have probably highlighted management analysts. We may have some people in the audience that are management analysts, and that growing at a much faster rate than occupations overall.
Chris, how recent is that data?
Those data are all, I didn't mark it here, but those are the same as the others, which are second quarter 2020, and I will make sure to add that footnote before we send it out this afternoon. Thanks for that question, Avery.
Great.
Okay. Now, before we close here, I thought I'd pull some of the job postings on accountants and auditors in the past 30 days in Virginia. So you can see there were 2,359 openings, and you can see that recently that has been tracking above what we saw last year. The last week, though, down. The locations, McLean is number 1, but interestingly, Richmond is number 2 in terms of the number of openings. Then we go back to Arlington and Northern Virginia areas. The companies that are hiring right now, and about 12% of the job ads will identify a wage, and when they do, we show it here. But you've got Intuit at the top, Ernst & Young, within Richmond, most probably Capital One hiring, BAE Systems, Amazon, H&R Block giving a number that looks like a part-time number, and Cordia Resources also giving a number. We show median duration, so how long is it sitting out there? And that gives us a sense of demand or supply, or the lack of supply. The longer it sits out there as an ad, we're thinking that the market is tight for that particular type of accountant that they're looking for. The certifications that are required in Virginia, no surprise, many of them require a CPA or a CIA. It's interesting to look at the median wage being requested relative to the certification. So would it be worth it for me to go after a CISA certification in addition to a CPA? And if I were to just look at the increase in wage I might get, yes, it would. Now I drop down to the Richmond area. And here you can see openings over the past 30 days for accountants. It was much stronger in Richmond a year ago. But you can see again that we picked up more recently in October. Right now, 353 openings in the Richmond area for accountants with a median wage of about $56,000. And the firms that are hiring, Ernst & Young, CarMax, Dominion Energy, Kiter, BDO, Capital One toward the bottom. And the certifications required, not unlike the previous that we were seeing, with CPA at the top, then CIA, and then certified fraud examiner, not nearly as many. It drops off pretty quickly after that. So let me ask one more question before we go through the final slides. And that would be, how do you feel about the future of your organization in 2021?
Yeah, so again, if you could type your answer in the chat and then also click on the poll. For CPE credit, we're going to be looking at whether or not you type your answer in the chat. And if now you're thinking, oh no, I've only answered in the poll, don't worry, you just retroactively type your answer to a previous question that you remember in the chat and it will all be good. We just want to verify that you're active, and we can see that you are based on your activity in the chat. All right, it looks like a few more people are answering this question about the future of your organization in 2021. All right, I'm going to close this poll, but you can still type your answer in the chat. Okay, 57% of the people in this webinar say they think their organization's revenue will increase in 2021, and 34% said it would stay about the same. Only 8% of the people here think that revenue will decrease in 2021.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's good news to hear. All right, thank you for answering that. Okay, in ending then, this is something that I haven't showed you in the past, but we started to pull resume data. And why do we do this? Because we want to know what the supply looks like. So when we look at job postings, that's the demand. We've got plenty of information on the demand side, but on the supply side, we look at resumes, and here I looked at the resumes we were able to obtain for accountants.
Can you zoom in again?
Yes.
Thanks.
And so you could see of those 1,400 resumes that we've been able to find in Richmond, that 332 for accountants, then you have bookkeepers, financial managers, and this gives us a sense again of what is the supply of those workers in this region. What certificates do they hold? So most of them hold, 125 of them hold, or the largest percentage of them hold CPA. Interestingly, the next one is CPR, and then notaries. And this is what's being identified on their resumes as certifications that they hold. And then we can look at a particular firm. So here we said, what kind of firms, what kind of occupations are Capital One trying do work at Capital One right now? And so this gives you an idea of the mix of employment that they have at Capital One. The resumes that we see out there of people whose last firm that they worked at, who are currently working at Capital One, are mainly software developers. A lot of them are computer-related occupations, but there, second at the top, we've got fraud examiners, investigators, and analysts. And then what certifications are held by these individuals that work at Capital One. And we think this is helpful because it could give you an idea that would be more thorough than a job ad of what certifications people hold at particular companies. And so you see at the top, Certified Scrum Master, but again, second there is Project Management Professional. So again, this is a new database that we've started to take a look at to try to get a better sense of what the market looks like by resumes or in terms of supply, which then allows us to look at skills gaps. So here we're looking at resumes versus job ads. So, and what we found is that there seems to be a gap in Richmond for accountants and auditors that have experience with internal auditing or GAAP. But on the bottom side, we seem to have plenty of people relative to the job ads that are out there in the area in terms of reconciliation. People who have skills in reconciliation are greater than the percentage of those job ads that are requiring that in the Richmond area. Tax software, plenty of experience with people in the Richmond area relative to what the ads are asking for. So again, just wanted to give you a sense of another source of data that we're starting to explore to give a better sense of skills. Certainly we can see where there are gaps in accountants, but when we get to the skill level, what skills do accountants lack here in the Richmond area? If we went to other areas, we may find that there's a surplus of individuals with internal auditing relative to the job postings. So with that, to summarize and end, the national economic outlook in terms of GDP, we expect to be sharp and short, not sustained, and we'll get evidence of that at tomorrow morning at 8:30 when GDP comes out for the third quarter. It varies greatly by region, depending on the spread of the disease or the virus, as well as the type of the industries in the region. In terms of employment, we're expecting Virginia to reach pre-COVID levels along with the nation in 2022. And as we look forward over the next 10 years, grow at about the same pace as the nation in the long run. So before you all leave, I'd like to remind you to register for the next CPE event. And here's the link where you can register. Again, Avery or Jen will send these slides to everyone so you can have them as a reminder, and you could look through the presentation that we had here. Thank you very much for spending time with us. We appreciate you attending, and let me ask Jen if she has any final comments to make.
Yes. So Jen just texted me. She said she's lost audio, but wants to send a big thank you to you, Chris, and to the Chmura team, and to all attendees. CPE will certainly be sent out in the next week or two. Chris, before we do the final sign off, do you think we have time to answer about 2 or 3 questions?
Sure, that sounds good.
Awesome. So first, we talked about manufacturing in the Hampton Roads area. Does that take into account the growth of the wind energy industry?
I would say no, but
Okay.
but wind would come under utilities.
Okay.
And so, and I'm trying to think of if some of the manufacturing will be occurring in Virginia, or if we'll be getting the parts from somewhere else. So, so manufacturing is predominantly related to ship creation and repair.
Mm-hmm.
So the wind I would expect to be a very, very small component of that. It will be utilities, and it will be a very small component
of utilities.
Yeah, and of manufacturing if indeed it's produced in the state.
Gotcha. All right, thank you. We have a second question, which is based on our final poll question about revenue increasing or decreasing. Abigail comments, given that 2020 was not a great year for revenue, it's likely that many companies will see revenue higher in 2021 versus 2020. But do you think it will be the same as pre-COVID? So maybe 2019 versus 2021?
Yeah, that's a good question. And if you were on the previous webinar, we talked about the K recovery. So meaning that, you think about what a K looks like in the upper half of it going up. So companies that have been able to work from home, many of them are probably seeing revenues sustained from a year ago or even higher. And some companies that might, that are dependent on like cloud services or things that have shifted to more growth because of COVID are doing much better. But then there's unfortunately, the retail, the accommodation and food services that you're right, it's going to be at a very low level compared to a year ago. And it will take a couple of years, if that, to get back to pre-COVID revenues.
Gotcha. Kind of related question is, and I think this will be our last one since let's pass through 15. How will automation impact people getting back to work?
That's a good question. All these have been
big
good
question.
Yeah. Yeah. So we always see an acceleration of trends when we go through recessions, in part because businesses are trying to cut costs. And so I would expect to see automation accelerate even further. Just a couple of examples: retail, or ordering food, more kiosks being used so that you don't have to be, face to face with someone. Or we heard about Amazon creating something where there are no cashiers. You just go and put it in your basket. And when you put it in your basket, you get charged for it. If you take it out of your basket and put it back, then it comes off your bill. And then manufacturing activity where you have to social distance even more, we may see them implementing more productivity measures to make that happen. So yes, I'd expect that to accelerate as it typically does during a recession.
All right, that makes sense.
So thank you, Avery, for bringing up those questions, and thank you again, everyone, for attending. And we'll send out a copy later this afternoon with any corrections or additions needed, putting dates on there. And please be safe, go out and spend, but wear your masks and take your hand sanitizer.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.